In the fall of 1787, the United States was not yet the powerful nation we know today. It was young, fragile, deeply divided. The American Revolution had been won, but peace had brought a new kind of crisis. The states were jealous of their power, the national government was weak, the economy was unstable, foreign powers were watching, and many Americans were beginning to wonder whether the revolution had created a nation or just 13 separate governments with a shared war story. Then came a bold proposal, a brand new constitution. It promised a stronger federal government, a president, a national court system, and a Congress with real power. To supporters, it was the solution to America's problems. To critics, it looked like a dangerous step toward monarchy, corruption, and tyranny. The Constitution had been written, but it still had to be approved, and that is where one of the most important political writing projects in American history began. A series of essays written at remarkable speed, published under a fake name, designed to persuade a skeptical public. Today we know them as the Federalist Papers. But at the time they were part explanation, part sales pitch, part political combat, and part warning. If this constitution failed, the American experiment might fail with it. Before the Constitution, the United States operated under its first national framework, the Articles of Confederation. The Articles created a loose union of states. Congress existed, but it had limited power. It could ask states for money, but it could not directly tax. It could make requests, but it often could not enforce them. There was no single president, there was no strong national judiciary. Each state had its own interests, its own policies, and often its own priorities. This setup made sense to many Americans right after the Revolution. They had just fought a war against a powerful central authority. The last thing they wanted was another government that could become too strong. But soon, the weaknesses became impossible to ignore. The national government struggled to pay debts from the war. Trade disputes broke out between states. Foreign countries doubted whether the United States could keep agreements. In Massachusetts, an armed uprising known as Shays' Rebellion exposed just how fragile the country could be when unrest spread and the national government had little power to respond. By 1787, many leaders believed the Articles were not enough, so delegates met in Philadelphia to revise them. Instead, they created something entirely new. The Constitutional Convention met during the summer of 1787. Its work was secret. Windows were kept closed despite the heat, partly to keep debate private. The result was a constitution that transformed the national government. It created a federal system dividing power between the national government and the states. It created 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. It gave Congress the power to tax, regulate interstate commerce, and raise armies. It created the office of president. It set up a Supreme Court. But the Constitution did not automatically become law. It had to be ratified by conventions in at least 9 of the 13 states. And that triggered one of the most intense public debates in American history. Supporters of the Constitution became known as Federalists. Opponents became known as Anti-Federalists. The Federalists argued that the country needed a stronger national government to survive. The Anti-Federalists warned that the Constitution gave too much power to the center. They feared it could crush the states, threaten liberty, and create an elite ruling class. Many also objected that the Constitution did not include a Bill of Rights. This debate played out in newspapers, pamphlets, speeches, taverns, and state ratifying conventions, and nowhere was the battle more important than New York. New York was a major state. Its position mattered, but ratification there was far from certain. So 3 men decided to defend the Constitution in print. They were Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Hamilton was a brilliant, ambitious New Yorker who had served as an aide to George Washington during the Revolution. Madison, from Virginia, had played a central role at the Constitutional Convention and understood the document better than almost anyone. Jay, also from New York, was a respected diplomat and statesman who had helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War. Together they wrote under the pen name Publius. That name was not random. It referred to Publius Valerius Publicola, a figure from the early Roman Republic associated with defending republican government. The message was clear. These essays were not just about legal details. They were about whether republican liberty could survive. Between October 1787 and May 1788, the authors produced 85 essays. Most appeared in New York newspapers. Later, they were collected into book form. Hamilton wrote the majority. Madison wrote many of the most famous. Jay wrote a smaller number, partly because illness interrupted his work. The goal was simple but enormous: convince Americans, especially New Yorkers, that the Constitution deserved to be ratified. But the essays did more than campaign for votes. They became one of the clearest explanations of the Constitution's design ever written. The Federalist Papers were not casual opinion pieces, they were a full-scale argument. Hamilton opened the series with Federalist No. 1, framing the debate in dramatic terms. He argued that Americans had a rare opportunity to decide, through reflection and choice, whether people could establish good government for themselves. In other words, the world was watching to see if self-government could actually work. The essays covered almost every major concern about the Constitution. Would a large republic collapse? Would the national government become too powerful? Would the president become a king? Would Congress dominate the states? Could liberty survive under a stronger union? The Federalist Papers answered these fears one by one, and their central argument was this: a stronger national government was not the enemy of liberty. If properly designed, it could protect liberty. That idea was powerful because many Americans assumed power itself was the danger. The Federalists agreed that power was dangerous, but they argued that weakness could be dangerous too. A government too weak to keep order, defend the country, pay its debts, or protect rights could endanger freedom just as much as a government that was too strong. The Constitution, they argued, offered a balance. One of the most famous essays is Federalist No. 10, written by James Madison. Its subject was faction. By faction, Madison meant a group of citizens united by a shared interest or passion that could harm the rights of others or the common good. In plain language, groups can become dangerous when they put their own desires above everyone else. Madison believed factions were unavoidable. People have different opinions, different property, different religions, different occupations, and different interests. You could not remove the causes of faction without destroying liberty itself. So the real question was not how to eliminate factions. The question was how to control their effects. This is where Madison made one of the most famous arguments in American political thought. Many people believed republics could only survive in small territories. Madison argued the opposite. A large republic could actually be safer because it would contain many different groups and interests. In a large republic, it would be harder for one faction to dominate everyone else. The size and diversity of the United States, which some critics saw as a weakness, Madison presented as a strength. A large republic would not make conflict disappear, but it could make tyranny by one majority less likely. That idea remains central to how Americans think about pluralism, competition, and representative government. Another essential essay is Federalist No. 51, also associated with Madison. Here the focus is the structure of government. The famous idea is simple: ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The Constitution did not rely on good intentions alone. It assumed that people in power might try to expand their power. So the system had to be designed in a way that each branch could resist the others. Congress would make laws, the president would execute laws, the courts would interpret laws, but none of these branches would be completely independent in practice. Each would have tools to check the others. The president could veto legislation, Congress could override vetoes and control funding, the Senate would confirm appointments and treaties, the courts could judge legal disputes, judges would hold office during good behavior, giving them independence from short-term political pressure. This was not a system designed for speed. It was designed for restraint. The Federalists knew that government needed energy, but they also believed that liberty required limits. The Constitution's answer was not to trust one person, one branch, or one temporary majority. One of the anti-Federalists' greatest fears was the presidency. The United States had just rejected a king, so when the Constitution created a single executive, critics grew suspicious. Could this president become an elected monarch? Hamilton answered this concern in several essays, especially those discussing the executive branch. He argued that the president was not a king. The president would be elected for a limited term. The president could be impeached and removed. The president could not make laws alone. The president could not tax by personal command. The president could not declare war by himself. Hamilton did believe in an energetic executive. He thought the government needed decisiveness, especially in foreign affairs, law enforcement, and national defense. But he also argued that energy in the executive was compatible with Republican government, as long as the office remained accountable and limited by the Constitution. This was a difficult balancing act. Enough power to govern, not enough power to rule like a monarch. That tension has never fully disappeared. Every generation has debated whether presidents have too much power, too little power, or the wrong kind of power. The Federalist Papers did not end that debate. They helped begin it. Hamilton also wrote one of the most important defenses of the federal judiciary, Federalist No. 78. In it, he described the judiciary as the least dangerous branch because it had neither the sword nor the purse. In other words, courts did not command the military, and they did not control spending. Their power was judgment. Hamilton defended life tenure for federal judges, meaning judges would serve during good behavior rather than for fixed short terms. The purpose was independence. Judges needed protection from political pressure so they could apply the Constitution and laws fairly, even when their decisions were unpopular. Federalist No. 78 is also famous for its discussion of courts treating the Constitution as higher law. Hamilton argued that when ordinary laws conflict with the Constitution, courts should follow the Constitution. This idea helped lay the intellectual foundation for what later became known as judicial review, though the Supreme Court would famously assert that role in Marbury v. Madison in 1803. Again, the Federalist Papers did not settle every question, but they gave later generations a framework for arguing about them. The anti-Federalists raised real concerns. They worried that the national government would grow beyond its limits. They feared distant rulers would ignore local needs. They believed liberty required clear protections, and many argued that without a Bill of Rights, individual freedoms were at risk. These objections mattered. In fact, they helped shape the future of the Constitution. During the ratification debate, Federalists often argued that a Bill of Rights was unnecessary because the federal government only had powers granted to it. But that answer did not satisfy many Americans. The pressure from anti-Federalists helped lead to the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, ratified in 1791. So while the Federalists won the ratification battle, the anti-Federalists left a lasting mark. American constitutional government was shaped by both sides, the Federalist demand for effective national power and the anti-Federalist insistence on protecting liberty from that power. The Constitution needed 9 states to ratify it. On June 21, 1788, New Hampshire became the 9th state to approve it, meaning the Constitution could go into effect. But 2 major states still mattered deeply, Virginia and New York. Virginia ratified on June 25, 1788. New York followed on July 26, 1788, after a hard-fought convention. Did the Federalist Papers single-handedly win New York? Probably not. Politics is rarely that simple. Many delegates came with strong opinions already formed. Personal influence, regional interests, and news from other states all played a role. Once New Hampshire and Virginia ratified, New York faced the possibility of being outside the new union if it refused. But the Federalist Papers gave supporters of the Constitution a powerful intellectual weapon. They explained the document in detail. They answered objections. They created a public defense that could be read, shared, and preserved. Their greatest impact may not have been immediate. Today, the Federalist Papers are still studied by historians, lawyers, judges, students, and political thinkers. They are often cited in debates about constitutional meaning. They help explain what leading supporters of the Constitution believed they were creating. They reveal the hopes and fears surrounding the founding of the United States. But they should be read carefully. They were not neutral textbooks. They were persuasive essays written to win a political fight. Their authors emphasized the Constitution's strengths and answered criticism with the goal of securing ratification. Still, that does not make them less important. It makes them more interesting. They show democracy in action before the system was even fully born. Arguments, fears, rival essays, public persuasion, competing visions of liberty, and a nation trying to decide what it wanted to become. The Federalist Papers remind us that the Constitution was not accepted automatically. It had to be defended, it had to be explained, it had to survive public doubt. And the questions raised in those essays are still alive. How strong should the national government be? How do we protect liberty while maintaining order? How do we prevent majorities from trampling minorities? How do we stop leaders from abusing power? How much should courts decide? How much energy should a president have? How much power should remain with the states? These are not dead questions from the 1780s. They are American questions. The Federalist Papers began as a campaign. 3 men, writing under one name, tried to persuade the people of New York to accept a new constitution. But the essays became something larger. They became a guide to the logic of the American system, a defense of balanced government, a warning about human ambition, a study of factions, power, liberty, and compromise. Hamilton, Madison, and Jay did not believe the Constitution was perfect. They believed it was necessary. They knew the United States faced a dangerous choice: remain a weak confederation that might fall apart, or build a stronger union that could preserve Republican government. Their argument was bold. Liberty did not depend on government being powerless. It depended on government being properly designed. That design would be tested again and again by war, by political parties, by slavery and civil conflict, by expansion, by economic crisis, by social movements, by every generation that inherited the Constitution and argued over what it meant. More than 2 centuries later, the Federalist Papers still matter because they capture a country at a turning point, not after all the answers had been found, but at the moment when the questions were being fought over in public, in newspapers, by candlelight, under a borrowed Roman name. The Constitution was the blueprint, the Federalist Papers were the argument, and America, in many ways, has been arguing with them ever since.